We do travel all around Texas, and hopefully we can get some more cities here. Come on.
Everybody, thank y'all for coming. My name is Savannah Eldrige. I'm one of the steering committee members for the Statewide Leadership Council. I'm one of the steering committee members for the Statewide Leadership Council. And I had the honor of being invited to take part in this coalition. I'm one of the first members who had who's never been arrested, never been to jail. But I was honored that Doug invited me to be a part of this and seeing that my voice was valuable. And since then, I'm a nurse by trade, and so I try to use my career, my occupation to help move this work forward as well. But with the Statewide Leadership Council, our goal is to go county by county, and there's 254 for those who don't know, to try to reach every single family who's been impacted by the justice system. And we know that 1 in 2 people have a loved one, an immediate loved one who've been impacted by the justice system. So I really expect to see these events full. But until then, we're going to go and take this word and spread it to our community. So thank you again for coming. And please take these resources back into your community so that the people who need them most will have access to them.
Sorry, I'm short, so if y'all need to remove the mic. Hi, Marc. So our next steering committee member that's here is Marc Vasquez, and he is from Bar, Texas. He came all the way to Houston.
Thank you for being here. Those of you who drove from out of town, sincerely, thank you for coming out here. It's really good to see so many people here, so many people that were impacted or affected by the system. I myself, Marc Vasquez, I come from the Rio Grande Valley down in South Texas in the border communities. And I myself am system impacted. Going back to high school, my father served in prison settings. And then when we came of age, me and my brother, we also started having different stays in county jail, rehabilitative programs, number of different pre-diversion programs. And it never really dawned on us what was taking place. We kept this sense that what was happening to us was well-deserved. That what we're doing is blurring the distinction between what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. And therefore, the facilities that they built were built specifically for people like us. And I carried that for so long. And it wasn't until maybe about 4 years ago that it dawned on me that there was something else involved. I started reaching out to folks in my communities down there in South Texas. The conversations that we were having dealt around the issue of mass incarceration and the system itself and the criminal legal system. So when I teamed up, in those years, I remember hearing names like Doug Smith, hearing names like Chris Harris, hearing names like Steve Huerta, wondering who are these individuals? And I want to meet these individuals. Who are these folks that I want to reach out to them? And by the grace of God, I ended up being invited to a meeting with the Statewide Leadership Council. And lo and behold, there was Doug Smith. And some of the other individuals that I had heard about, I started meeting them as well. And ever since then, it's been on. As a member of the Statewide Leadership Council, I take seriously the idea, the notion that not only are we empowering ourselves as leaders, formerly incarcerated, those individuals who are impacted by the system, but we're taking this also into our communities to empower leaders within our communities. Those members of our communities who otherwise we don't hear much about them. Those individuals who live in the shadows, those individuals who feel perhaps like I did, that what happened was well deserved, and that I just got to keep on and move on with my life or what have you. But if one were to re-examine, as we, the Statewide Leadership Council, attempt to do, to re-examine what were those factors that contributed to the mass incarceration complex that we see now, the conversation takes a whole new shape because it leads you to reimagine what that true change will look like in our communities. And that's what we're trying to do here. We recognize that there's a voice. We recognize there's a collective, but we also recognize that a lot of them feel like they're alone. But we want all of you here to know, and we want you to share this with your communities, that they are not alone. Those individuals who have family members who are incarcerated, you are not alone. Those individuals who themselves have criminal backgrounds and criminal records, you're not alone. And the purpose of these particular events like today, one, to inform. You take this information, take it back with you to your communities. but also to empower one another. And we share a collective voice. And together there's strength in that voice. And to be quite frank with you, I think it's about time we step up. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Where's Lori? Okay, I'm sorry. So this is the Statewide Leadership Council. We have been traveling across Texas and hoping to build communities like this. And like Marc just said, and like I said previously, when we go to the Capitol next year, I want to be able to call on the groundswell of the people that have been affected by these things. We have people making laws who've never even set foot inside of the jail. We have people making laws about our family members who are sitting in there and they don't care, you know? And so, and like one of the House reps said, Texas has a give a damn problem. They don't give a damn about the people who are locked up. And so we need to start fixing that. Are we ready?
Sure.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our first speaker, and this is Mr. Marc Levin. He was with the Right on Crime Coalition, and now he works with the Council to Justice.
Council on Criminal Justice.
Yes, Council on Criminal Justice, so come on.
It's great to be here, and I've been involved in this effort since 2005. And you know, it's the thing that's most rewarding is to actually see policy change affect people's lives. And one of the interesting examples is I was at the Cleveland prison unit where the prison entrepreneurship program is. Some of you may be familiar with that. Of course, we know it's Cleveland, Texas. But I was talking to a young man who had been locked up since he was like 15 years old. But he had heard about some of the legislation that had passed. And for example, saying you can get an occupational license, even if you have a conviction, as long as it's unrelated to the job, which it almost always is. And so, you know, I think that as we see a lot of injustice throughout our society and of course in the criminal justice system, we have to also keep in mind there's hope, and that we've seen change right here in Texas. Really, to give you an example, we now have 119,500 people locked up in Texas prisons. That's a lot of people. But just about 7 or 8 years ago, or 10 years ago, I'm losing track now. I started on this in 2005, but I'll tell you, I guess it was probably 2007. There were about 160,000 people in Texas prison. So you might know that Texas had roughly 20% more people then. So we cut our incarceration rate at the state level in Texas by almost half over that time. But we do have a lot of work to do. And of course, right here in Harris County, as some of you know, overflow individuals were just sent to Louisiana from the Harris County jail, which creates a lot of problems in terms of visitation, in terms of access to the courts, access to your lawyer. So we still do have a lot of work to do. But I think one of the things I really want to communicate to you is, first of all, your voices make an incredible difference. I've testified hundreds of times before the Texas legislature, sometimes at 3 in the morning. But when someone comes up who themselves was incarcerated, or a family member of someone in prison, that's when these members really kind of look up from their, phones, if you will. And because they've heard me a million times, and I can tell them all the statistics. I can tell them that alternatives to prison have made us safer and also save the taxpayers a lot of money, which they do care about, believe me. But I think I will say, lawmakers, I do think they care about redemption. Many of them, whether it's because of their religious beliefs. They care about, of course, public safety, but we know prisons actually, many individuals come out, understandably angry when they leave prison. They actually weren't as much of a threat, if a threat at all, to society when they came in. But to survive in prison, you oftentimes have to get involved with a gang, for example. You certainly have to put on a brave face. And that's an issue I hope we also talk about, is the staffing crisis in our prisons, which makes them even more unsafe. And of course, the lack of air conditioning. I mean, we've had just unconscionable number of heat deaths and heat-related illnesses among both correctional officers and people who are incarcerated. So we've got to bring this to the attention of lawmakers. But what I want to tell you is there's a feedback mechanism, I believe, between what happens here locally and in cities and counties across the state and what happens at the state level. So I'll give you two examples, which are marijuana and state jails. So there's a certain degree to which you've seen an opting out of the system or of existing laws in some ways because they don't work. Now, we all know in terms of marijuana, Texas laws are well behind most other states and well behind where the vast majority of the public, both liberals and conservatives are. And so what happens basically in most major cities in Texas, people are being diverted or not arrested. Austin is about to approve a measure that will formalize that by a ballot proposition. The city of Austin this year, but it's going to say, police will not enforce laws against marijuana possession. So, of course, as you know, in Texas, it's still a misdemeanor, class B at the lowest level, carrying jail time, potentially. Now, we did pass a cite and summons law in Texas many years ago, which Governor Rick Perry signed, I worked on with Jerry Madden, John Whitmire, and many others. So it does give police the option to issue a summons. So that's one area. And then, state jails. The number of people being sent to state jails has declined dramatically. And that's because judges and even many prosecutors realized they weren't working. We were sending people, and we still are to some degree, sending people to state jail for less than a gram of drugs or low-level property crimes for several months because they've already accumulated time in the county jail because they can't afford to bail out, even though they're low risk in many instances. And so then they go to state jail, and there's only a few months left after their county jail time is credited, not enough to even get into a program. But then they go back home. It's like a warehouse with a revolving door. They go back home after those few months with no reentry support. There's no parole for state jail. And how are you going to get a job? How are you going to get a place to live when you just got out of a state jail with no support, but what, $25 and some clothes? Maybe. I know in some instances they're giving out women's clothes because they run out of men's clothes. So, it's it doesn't work. The recidivism rates are about 2/3, and that's in the legislative budget board data. So judges, prosecutors realize the state jails aren't working, so they stop sending people and sending a lot of people to diversion programs, to probation, which obviously probation has its own challenges, but there's some good people here like Theresa May that are realizing that we have to tailor the conditions to the person, make sure we don't overwhelm them with fines and fees with probation, but opting out of state jails. So again, we haven't been able to pass state jail reform in terms of legislation. We haven't been able to pass marijuana reform yet in Texas, but local folks are realizing the laws are behind the times and they don't work, and they're finding other solutions. Now we need to move the money, the budget for incarceration that we're not using at the state level, move that back to drug treatment, mental health treatment, community-based approaches to justice. So that's the other part of that. Now, let me also give you some other kind of hopeful points of reference. We have in Texas a bipartisan criminal justice reform caucus in our Texas House. The two chairs of that, Jeff Leach, a Republican from the Metroplex, and Joe Moody, who I just spoke with yesterday, who's a Democrat from El Paso, they're both coming back next session, and they're committed to moving forward on this. And I'm told Speaker Phelan is as well on a range of criminal justice reforms, and I'll talk about a few of those. So that's very positive. A lot of the reforms last session did pass the House, and then they ran into problems in the Senate. And in some cases, like Second Look, were vetoed by the governor, although he says he supports the concept. So that's very encouraging. So we have this caucus. We have a lot of unlikely or non-traditional allies. We have the business community. We have religious groups, both evangelical and otherwise, a wide range of religious groups. But the business community realizes this is a matter of our workforce. That having a conviction, you saddle someone with that, it really undermines their ability to contribute to the prosperity of all of us. So let me use that as kind of a segue to the clean slate. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with clean slate laws, but Pennsylvania, Michigan, Utah, they passed these automatic record clearing bills. So, and the reason that there's been a focus on that, now now I worked on some record sealing in Texas, which we have for either if you have deferred adjudication for a wide range of things, or if you have an actual conviction. It's only for nonviolent misdemeanors, unfortunately, and a first one. And so, but what the research has shown is that most people don't take advantage who are eligible, and this is nationally, of record clearing laws, because most states have some type of record clearing laws, at least for the lowest level offense. But in many states, you have to file a petition. And in Texas, that's true in many cases as well. It's not automatic. And my view is, bill pardons have an expiration date. The convictions ought to have an expiration date. If you've done everything you're supposed to and you haven't gotten another pressure, the law ought to go away. And so that's what Clean Slate would do. And that bill passed the House last session overwhelmingly and didn't get taken up in the Senate. So there are many examples of that. But let me talk about another one, Second Look, which I think many of you are familiar with. And this one made it all the way through both chambers last session, and the governor said he's committed to working on it again. There was a mix up on some of the language, but we're talking about 15, 16, 17-year-olds that were given what are effectively life sentences, and this legislation will allow them to be reviewed after a reasonable period, 15 or 20 years. And by the way, a similar bill was just heard yesterday in New Mexico. It is moving forward there, and it's also passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support in Ohio. So we have the data because we've seen the Second Look law in Michigan and Pennsylvania. It's a less than 1% recidivism rate of these individuals. And the great thing here in Texas is we have a number of groups that are working to provide resources for these individuals as they re-enter. The average person doesn't understand if you've been in prison for 20, 30 years, you don't know how to use a cell phone, you don't know email, the basic things to function in our society. So I'm very excited about that. I'll just mention a few other things and then I'll wind up. But drug sentencing reform, gosh, back in 2007, a bill passed the Senate that I worked on that would have said, if you have a drug possession 3rd degree, 1 to 4 grams, you have to basically receive an alternative to prison, and we still need to do that. We obviously, as I said earlier, need to do marijuana reform. It is true that fewer people are being sentenced to prison for drugs in Texas now, but when you get on probation for a felony, a drug possession, 1 to 4 grams, okay, then if you miss a meeting or something, and again, it varies depending on the probation department, but some of them in the state are much more, particularly in rural areas, much more inclined to revoke people for technical violations. So as soon as you get a felony conviction, even if you're not direct sentenced to prison or state jail, it puts you at risk of having that happen for, rules violations, and it gives you that scarlet letter. So it's very important that we also look at perhaps taking that down from a felony to a misdemeanor for possession of 1 to 4 grams of drugs, but certainly making it presumptively where you cannot be incarcerated. Now, one of the other areas that I'll mention that I think is very important is civil asset forfeiture, and there's a real groundswell of bipartisan interest in this, but as you know, police can take somebody's property, their cash, from their vehicle when they're pulled over, and then it's the burden of that individual to file a civil lawsuit to get their property back. And it's completely backwards, and we're pretending that somehow this is a civil matter when it's really the long arm of the government used to punish somebody before they've been convicted of a crime. And so there's a lot of legislation that would move us in the direction that 15 states have done to basically say it ought to be criminal forfeiture. They ought to be proof. You have to be convicted of a crime in order for the government title of your property to pass to the government. Because the question is your property the fruit of illegal activity? And right now, the government just wins by default because who has the resources to hire an attorney to sue to get their property back, which may not even be worth what it would cost to have a lawyer. So there's some legislation that would, for example, require elevate the burden of proof from a real preponderance of the evidence, which is a coin flip, to clear and convincing evidence, for example. So, and then there's a number of other issues that we can discuss too, including police reform. But I really want to make the point to y'all that that we have moved the needle in Texas. There's a lot more work to do. And I think it's important, so y'all can go up there if you can, testify before committees. You can communicate with legislators, especially those from your district, and get them on record. This is very important during this time frame, because they will be asked, if we get, there's a lot of turnover. There's a number of members who retired, especially with the district. So now there's candidate forums all over the state and such. They're asked questions about, what do they think about some of these topics? And if they say something without having all the information and they go on record, then they're kind of going to feel boxed in many instances. So if you can reach them with, your stories, the facts, the data, before they go on record, that will help as we get into the session. And we're also going to have interim charges in the coming months, where we'll have committees that will be producing studies and recommendations on some of these topics. So I encourage you to get involved. You can testify at those interim hearings even before the legislative session starts. So let me just, I'd be glad to take any questions or comments, but keep working on this. I want you to know that Texas has made some positive changes, but there's a lot more work to do. And with your help, it'll get done. Thanks. Well, on the legislative website, and these will be after the primary, I imagine maybe after the runoffs of the primaries, but certainly after the March primary, because obviously a lot of members are campaigning now. Of course, they'll be campaigning between then and November election, but most of the districts aren't competitive in the general election. So after these primaries and the primary runoff, we'll more or less know, except for maybe 5 to 10 districts, who's going to be back or coming. This will be again, there's probably going to be what, 20 new members at least in the House, 25 of the new members in the Senate. Some of them were former House members. But yes, the interim hearings will potentially start in April after the March runoff, or they might start in May after the runoffs. The runoffs would be in May for the March primary. So, but yeah, over the summer, and if you go to the Texas legislative website, mostly they're in Austin, but they do typically do a few around the state when particularly they touch on an issue that's relevant to a particular area. I don't, if you can't get there, just send an email to the members of that committee and, other staff. And that's the other thing, staff are really, I think they play a huge role. So if you can communicate with a staff member, that they pass that along to their boss, so that's still valuable.
So what's missing from a clean slate bill? What is the representative asking for, the reason that they're not on board with?
Well, we didn't have, I think in the House, some of y'all may remember, there were very few votes against it. The biggest challenge we had was actually with the fiscal vote. It ended up really very well. I think the fiscal vote was a couple $100,000, but the budget's in the tens of billions, so it was a drop in the bucket. So, because you have to create some technological mechanism to automatically have these records sealed. And so I think, had it gotten taken up in the Senate, there might have been people who, in the past, some of these bills have had opposition actually from an interesting source, television media in particular. You've all heard if it bleeds, it leads. Well, there's the argument that, well, we want to be able to find out everybody's dirty laundry and everything. But, the thing is, first of all, this didn't apply to, obviously things, homicide or rape and that sort of thing. But also that, once a period has passed where someone's been law abiding, there really isn't a public interest. We know there's actually been some studies, once somebody's been in the community for 5 years with no new offense, their chance that they'll commit a crime is about the same as somebody who has no criminal record. So there is no public interest really in having that, follow that person. So I think that, I think that it wasn't so much opposition per se, but it passed the House fairly late in the session. And there just, in general, there was a lot of, you could say criminal justice reform fatigue in the Senate. I think that, you know, we need to find more champions in the Senate, particularly on the conservative side. And we have some members who have stepped up in the past on things like second look, like Senator Ron Hughes. But we need more of those people. That's, you know, that's a critical thing. And of course, as you know, in the Senate, you need, it's been lowered, but you still need 60% roughly of the members to bring it up. It's like the US Senate. So that means you have to have a bipartisan coalition to get things done. So yeah, I'm optimistic, particularly on the second look bill, because it had a nearly unanimous vote in the Senate last session. I think Slate can make it. We've got a big fiscal note on that, and we have a Senate sponsor who was strong on that. So marijuana reform, I was just speaking with, I mentioned Joe Moody, who is the Speaker Pro Tem. He's very confident on that. So I do think there's a number of things that can get done. The key is getting these bills, you know, out of the House early next session, and then really cultivating the champions in the Senate.
You have a question?
Yeah. So my question is just basically about the process of that. Like, is that bill now dead and it has to be taken up again by the House again since the session expired?
Yes, every session is separate, and in fact, the special sessions are all separate too. Y'all may recall there were a lot of special sessions last year. Yes, so it all starts anew, but there's a real advantage. I mean, I think sometimes you see, it's actually very interesting if you look at the data, because the data shows, like, when the bill filing opens up, there's a date in December when they start filing bills. Like the bills that are like very first to be filed, a lot of them were ones that have failed in like, you know, 7 or 8 sessions. Those actually don't have a very good chance of passing, just historically. But those that are filed that have like, you know, 2 or 3 sessions where they've been considered before are actually statistically have a higher percentage, I believe, than bills that have never been considered before. And I think that's partly because you kind of flush out the opposition. And, you know, sometimes people have valid concerns that can be remedied, but take time to work through and to find the right language and all of that. So I think that that's important to keep in mind. And so, you know, kind of sometimes you start with a slightly different version and you account for the fact that some concern was raised. There was an amendment in the previous session to address that, because now you can just start with it the way that it's acceptable to hopefully all stakeholders. And that's a key. I mean, there's obviously the prosecutors have a significant lobby, police unions like Slate have a very powerful lobby. They've been able to derail things, but both the prosecutors and police unions opposed to massive forfeiture reform, which I mentioned earlier, because they get, of course, they split the proceeds. But some of the other things in terms of, like, there was a police decertification bill that was actually written by James White and Steve Toth, 2 conservative Republicans, and would have said, look, you know, right now, TCLOS, which oversees, you know, police licenses, law enforcement licenses, is basically toothless. Officers, you know, committing significant misconduct are still able to stay in the profession. And of course, without a decertification registry, they can go from one department to another, may not be noticed. But so there was this legislation to correct that, and that was derailed by Slate. And then, of course, the legislation that relates to not arresting people for fine-only traffic offenses. I know all of you remember St. Land. But this legislation had tremendous bipartisan support the last few sessions, and it's, you know, the police union Slate just completely submarined it. And a lot of legislators want to have that symbol on their and look, we all appreciate, especially if the officers shot close to where we are now, we all admire the job that good police officers do. But we're talking about, you know, pulling people over and taking them to jail. That's what this bill would have addressed. It said you can't take someone to jail for a failure to signal, for a broken tail light. I mean, when I tell people in other states that happens thousands of times a year in Texas, mostly to African American people and Hispanic people, much more so than whites. But they can't believe that. And in fact, in the Republican platform in Texas, and I'm a Democratic Party platform, it said we're for this legislation to say you can't be taken to jail when there's no danger to the officer, nothing else going on, simply violating one of these Class C traffic violations, which in a lot of states are civil to begin with. Expired inspection, sticker, broken tail light, failure to signal. So, that's one that, and by the way, I think that we talk a lot about the local, how that can kind of build up pressure and kind of the changes in local practices and kind of be a feedback mechanism on some of these state laws that are active. One thing you can do right now in terms of police departments and city councils in Texas is say, for every time an officer brings someone to jail where there's nothing else going on but a Class C violation, like failure to signal and such, they got to file a piece of paper that says why they chose to do that. Now, I bet if the Houston City Council and HPD, if they put that in place tomorrow, that would reduce it. That would reduce how many times this happened, because you just put a little more friction in the process. Oh, I got to fill out a document and explain why I did it. Maybe I don't need to do it. So that's the kind of thing we could be doing right now locally. So, I think we all, this is why it's so important that we get the right message to policymakers, because yes, we want to give police kind of the equipment and such that they need to deal with really serious situations, but we also want to focus these law enforcement resources, they're limited focus on preventing serious crimes. We're only solving now about 50% of murders across the country. It used to be 7 to 8, so that gets back to kind of rebuilding trust with this community. But when you bring people to jail for these traffic violations and take people's property without due process, that doesn't create that trust. So that's where we need to be talking about, I think.
Marc, a couple of sessions ago, there was a conversation in the policy community about limiting the amount of parole to 10 years. To your point earlier, after 5 years, we have evidence that you want to get diminishing benefits having someone continuously being on supervision if they haven't been in contact with law enforcement in all of those years. And so what I'm finding is there's a lot of people in the community that came through the system back in the late 80s and early 90s when they were getting those 40 and 50 and 60-year sentences, but they were only serving basically a year for every, a couple of months for every year. So what happened is we have a lot of people in the community that has 20, 25, 30 years on parole, but they've been working for the city for 10 years. So it's like, why are they still on parole? So I guess my question is, I don't know if we ever got the legislation to that effect proposed in one of those sessions, but I mean, I think that's something that's really pressing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the research is really strong also on probation, being on for more than a few years. In most cases, it doesn't deliver any additional benefit in terms of public safety. It detracts from the ability to provide supervision and services to people that actually need it. The parole board could be doing this now. They have an early termination administrative procedure, but it's rarely used. I mean, we ought to be, asking why that is. The other thing is, of course, as long as you're on parole, you can't vote, which in Louisiana, you can actually vote 5 years after you've been on probation parole for 5 years. Even if you're still on it, you can vote at that time. I mean, which, still is fall short of where we should be, but I just think we have to, say people have done what they're supposed to do, it's just, at some point it becomes punitive, and it really, what we're supposed to be doing is saying you should be under government supervision. And you're talking about this, we're talking about big government, this is big government, to say the rest of your life. I mean, in Nebraska, they have parole for life, but the rest of your life, virtually, in some cases, it turns out to be that way, you're going to have to say, if you want to leave the county, you've got to tell somebody. And if you forget to do that, then you committed a technical violation. All these, things that deprive you of your freedom that really are only justified if there's a basis to be concerned about the risk to the public. So we certainly looked at some legislation. There was some good parole legislation. There's one bill I know made it through the House last session. It didn't make it through the Senate. But Michigan passed what I think is a model parole law, which refers to it, we refer to it as objective parole, but it says in making parole decisions, the parole board is supposed to focus on the future, not the past. So in Texas, one of the top reasons for denying parole is the nature of the offense, but the legislature already considered the nature of the offense when they said you'd be eligible for parole after a certain period. So in Michigan, they can only consider your conduct while you were incarcerated, what programs you completed, and also, you know, of course, your risk to the public going forward, if any. So that I think is a type of thing we need to move towards in Texas, and we have that bill that passed the House last session that would have moved in that direction.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mark. Hello. Okay, so I want to just mention that I think it's so important to hear people who are well versed in this legislature and know how things work. Like I said, whenever I first started, I had to watch on YouTube, how does a bill become a bill? I'm just a bill on Recovery Hill. And so even though I still don't understand everything, but when people go to the Capitol, they have education, they know what they're doing, and we're left behind. So we need to start educating ourselves and making sure that we know what laws are being brought against us in our communities. And so I think it's so important to have these community sessions where we talk and we find out, look, I don't know how this works, but I want it to change. So, and we can support each other because, like I said, I learned off of YouTube. So, Dan has an announcement, and then we have Pure Justice.
Just really quickly, last session, I think it was Centralia, she did have a bill that would allow for finished commutation after 10 years, this last session. It didn't really get anywhere, but when we're up here talking about sessions or bills and legislature, like we have to remember, like a lot of people in the community don't know that jargon. So we did do an advocacy one-on-one training. I know a couple of other organizations are here and they did as well, but it's really important that we try to reach the community so that folks can understand the language and what we're saying. And so, I would know to go to tlo.org to look up a bill, but I'm not sure how many people in here would. So just make sure that you connect with one of these organizations in here or one of the people so that they can help you, because there are celebrity bills. Everybody probably knows about George Floyd, all these other bills, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a bill filed that you may not be interested in or that may not affect you and your family. So just make sure that you learn how to search the bills, how to follow the bills, so that you'll know, what you want to support. And the other thing I want to announce, there's a yellow food truck outside, Waffles, Wings, and Fangs. The food truck is supporting Restore Our City Streets. It's a food truck, and all the money goes to their women's transitional home out in Livingston. So please go support my drink, or all the way to Livingston. Come on, Maggie.
Okay, now we have Sasha, who is like the beast in Houston, and I'm so proud that she agreed to do this for us. So, Sasha from Pure Justice.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sasha Legette. I am one of the founders and the executive director for Pure Justice. We focus on criminal justice reform, economic justice, and racial justice. And we focus on those things because all of those things impact our communities the most, communities of color. There are also things that continuously serve to oppress our communities. And we understand that making policy change in each one of those areas to eliminate barriers is what's going to make sure our communities make sure that they have an opportunity, a fair and equitable opportunity to thrive. Now, this is actually going to be a conversation, so I am going to ask you all to engage because, unfortunately, we know what's best for us, right? Like, oftentimes there are folks that are up here who are gonna be talking to you and say, here's what it is, here's what it should be, blah, 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 blah. I'm not gonna do that, because I think we need to have a conversation about what changed, what safety, and what justice looks like for each and every one of us, right? And I'm gonna go off script, I was gonna go through this little piece of paper right here, but I think isn't it ironic that a lot of the conversation was talking about how we have to go to our lawmakers. We gotta go to the cabinet. We gotta go tell them, we gotta educate them. The reality is that every one of you in this room who came in here, you know data, you have information, they have access to that information. Before they ever step foot and start writing or advocating or anything else, they should be up here doing this. What is it that you need? What is it that's going on? How would you like that to be fixed? But they're not doing that. It's us doing it for us. And so, unfortunately, that's what we're given. But like Maggie said, we're gonna make sure that they understand what change and justice looks like for our community, not what they think it looks like based on the pieces of policy and legislation that they pass. So that's it. Maggie asked me to talk about what injustice looks like here in Harris County. And we're talking about injustice. Well, what we want to do is decrease mass incarceration. And in order to do that, we have to be honest about each area where people have an impact with the criminal justice system or an interaction with that criminal justice system and what needs to be done to address it. So what does injustice look like when it comes to policing? What does injustice look like when it comes to pretrial? What does injustice look like when it comes to representation? What does injustice look like when it comes to courts and sentencing, right? So here in policing, okay, in Harris County, unfortunately, African Americans are arrested more in traffic stops than their white counterparts. African Americans make up approximately 22% of the population, but account for almost 40% of the traffic stops. And that's a problem. Why is that happening? So the question is, what do we need to do about that? Another aspect of the policing is that African Americans are also 49% more likely to be arrested for things that they could get a citation for. They're going to get arrested and they're going to be taken to jail. And so they're less likely to get a citation than their white counterparts, despite the fact that they make up less of the population. What does this look like when it comes down to pretrial? What does injustice look like when it comes down to pretrial? As of this morning, there are 9,100 people in Harris County jail. The max population for Harris County jail is 10,000. We're literally almost at the breaking point. Okay, we're literally almost at the breaking point. And the question is, why? Can some of those people, be released? 7,200 of those people are there for pretrial, meaning they're waiting to find out if they can be released. They're waiting to find out what the evidence is against them. They're waiting to find out what is actually going to happen. And they're going to sit there until they can be seen and found out like what is going to happen with them. And why does that happen, right? And I have just a few questions. We know that our district attorney runs a 24-hour call center. The question is, do they have to accept all of the charges that come to that call center? Or some of them saying, you know what, actually, maybe this is not something that I have to accept because based on what I'm hearing, this person could be released. But the majority of the time, that's not happening. They're saying, yep, accept the charges, those people are going to jail. Okay. And then The other question we have is diversion. What other diversion program can be created? Now, you're gonna hear that we have diversion for like low-level drug offenses, you know, blah, blah. How often are they actually being used? Who's benefiting from them? And why is that the only diversion? What other diversions can we come up with that help us to, you know, keep people out of jail? For instance, there's specialty courts. Harris County has two specialty courts, one for mental illness and one for veterans. The whole purpose of those specialty courts is to make sure that the individuals who go through them get the services that they need and that they are not trafficked into the justice system. How come we don't have more specialty courts that focus on the same thing? It's a question. What does policing look like when it comes to prosecution and defense representation? Right now, Harris County has approximately 80,000 cases backlogged that they have to get to. 80,000, and that includes both felonies and misdemeanors. So, you know, and this is happening because the evidence needed to actually prosecute some of these cases is being collected manually. There's hours and hours and hours worth of data. Like I said before, there's a failure to have created and used diversion programs so that we can just, you know, push people into other situations where we don't actually have to prosecute these cases. And so those 80,000 cases means the defendants don't know what's going to happen to them for years to come. People who have been victims of that crime don't know what relief they're going to have for years to come. And we need to do something about it, right? When it comes down to defense representation, and this is a big deal, there are rules around, and I should think guidances around how many cases, specifically felony cases, criminal cases, a lawyer should take on. And that number is 150 felony cases annually. 150 felony cases annually, and a max of 400 cases for misdemeanors. What is happening to indigent defendants, meaning people who cannot afford to pay? They are getting routed to people, you know, lawyers who are taking on way more than 150 cases, way more. And what that is doing is putting pressure on defendants to either leave or get really shitty, really terrible legal representation, which impacts the outcome, right? And so that's the problem. You know, why are they allowed to take on this amount of cases when it's going to route more people into the criminal justice system, especially if they have viable cases, right? So the overload of indigent cases for the private attorneys is a big deal. And then lastly, we have a sentencing issue. If you are Black, you are more likely to get a harsher sentence than somebody who's white for committing the same crime. That is nationally. It's not just here in Harris County. That is across the board. And so, you know, some of that is happening, one, because let's just be honest, there are racial biases for the people who are handing out these sentences. It just is what it is, and we gotta just name it. The other thing is that jury representation is not always diverse. And so when it comes down to, you know, making sure a jury of your peers, you know, is on that stand listening to a case, we have to ensure that there is some diversity on the panel. And data shows that diverse juries actually deliberate and ask more questions. They're paying closer attention to cases than non-diverse jury panels. And so some of the things that here in Harris County, the district clerk did was do a survey of the community to say, you know, because the jurors here was less diverse. I mean, severe disparity in diversity. And so the district clerk asked questions on the survey to find out, why don't more minorities participate, on jury duty? And a lot of what she found was that it's a money issue. They cannot afford to miss work. And so one, they can't afford to miss work. It costs to come to jury duty and you have to pay for parking. And so those are issues. And what the district clerk did was raise juror pay last year so that it would be, more economically feasible for individuals to participate. Now, we don't know what the results are just yet. We don't know if that happens. Hope diversify the jury, but it is something that we're going to keep a close eye on. And so from that, with all of this information that I have, that you now have, that our elected officials have, and our decision makers have, what do we want to do about it? What does this need to look like for us to say, our community, we have ideas, and this is what should be done, and this is what we want you to do. At Pure Justice, we're working on a few different things. One of the things that we know helps to lessen mass incarceration and reduce recidivism is access to housing. We know that people who have a criminal record are 10 times more likely to be homeless. And if you are already homeless, you are 11 times more likely to have interaction with the criminal justice system. But the problem, you can't, people don't want to rent to you if you have a criminal record. Isn't that insane? When 1 out of 3 people in America have some sort of criminal record. So now you can have housing. If you wound up on the street, you're likely to be accosted by law enforcement and thrown in jail. So what Pure Justice is doing are a couple of different things. Like, how do we want to address this? Policy reform is definitely important. How do we remove those barriers? Because, like Maggie said earlier, just because someone may have a criminal record or criminal history or what have you, doesn't mean that they're a terrible person and that they should be denied their human rights. And housing is a human right. Okay. And so we're figuring out what should those policies actually look like to make sure that there's fairness when it comes to housing. Not just affordable housing, because even if you can afford it, they still don't want to give it to you, right? So we're looking at that, but then we're also thinking about, what is our community solution? I don't have time, like Marc said, to get the food, get the house. People just don't have time to get people out of their feelings. So, what we're doing is figuring out, maybe we should just create our own house. How do we get the resources to build our own house? So that we can give people the opportunities that they deserve. So that they can live in a place with dignity. Other things that we're thinking about is how do we bring criminal community courts here? Community courts is a kind of specialty court. It has been extraordinarily successful across the country. Our lawmakers know this. They're not dumb. They're very smart. But how come we don't have access to that here? And a community court is where community members like ourselves, social workers, others, come together to say, how do we address a crime that has happened in our community in a way that makes our community whole? Gives the person who did the crime the services that they need, but also gives them, a task that is not just punitive. Because if we're only punishing people and we're not rehabilitating them, then what are we doing? We're not making our community safer. Data shows that incarcerating individuals, jailing them, does not make us more safe. Putting more police in our community don't make people more safe. But when people have access to resources, like jobs, like housing, like mental health resources, we're safe. It decreases the level of recidivism significantly. And I also don't want to hear about that we don't have no money. Isn't it funny when we start talking about criminal justice reform and giving people what they need? Oh, you gotta consult the budget because why is that? But then you don't say to our community, you care about public safety. If you care about public safety, then give us what we need. Okay, and so my question for the audience is, what do you guys think that we need? What are some better alternatives to incarceration that make our community safe, that don't lock people up forever, you know, that doesn't harm them? What are some solutions or ideas that we have? Because that's what we need to start thinking about, and that's what our decision makers need to work on. Hey, Oscar.
Hey.
What's up?
You know, let's look at the reality of it. I believe before we concentrate on the cost, that we can have better control of our local and Harris County. Let's get control of people we put in place here. You know, because the truth is that if we look at communities that have resources, it isn't that they have no crime, but they have less crime. So it's a lack of resources. You know, you got people in these communities that come and don't have nothing to do. So what are they gonna do? They're gonna go down to the Galleria. They're gonna do things to feed their families. You know, we have to understand, instead of putting money in programs to put sound cameras or whatever on street lights that does nothing to deter crime. You know, only thing it detects is sound. They did the same thing in Chicago and look at the crime rate. So that money could be better spent putting it in programs in our community. But see, we have to come together. All these organizations have to come together, put pressure on these people to do the right thing for the people in the community. They have cite and release. The city passed it, and they ain't even instituting it. They still locking people up. They have misdemeanor bail reform. They ain't even working with it. It's just there because they're not doing anything with it. Now they want to overturn. So we have to start being better and putting pressure on these people we put in office. You know, making them do what we need them to do to address the issue.
Thank you. I mean, and I think that starts right here, right? Like coming to these kinds of things, this is where that starts. Us building unity and community together to say what we need. Yes, that's that.
Programs that offer like therapy, there's a lot of stuff that criminals have there. State has to do with their childhood. You know, it starts at home. So therapy is a big deal because, you know, not your situation is great. You got to break around and say, your results are going to be a lot better. Because I took therapy, so especially in the Black community, we don't come therapy. So, you know, so I'm in therapy. And then secondly, you gotta understand that prison is definitely a business. You can treat it like a corporation because all we are is just a number. We're not souls, we're not people, we're just a number that prisons get checks for. So you gotta figure that out and you have more diversity in the courtroom and stuff like that.
And what's your name? Keith. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Also, Keith, we don't call people criminals because they've committed a crime. It doesn't make sense. Okay, we say justice is wrong. Okay, and so that's another thing. We want to not label individuals because they did something at some point. That does not detect the rest of their life. Okay, but when we label them, then people and society continues to penalize them for that. So we have to be better about that as well.
I hear a lot of talk about the results of incarceration in the long-term effect. If someone goes to war, and they spend 20 years, they come back, or if they go to war and they spend a short amount of time, they have PTSD. I myself, I spent 25 years, he spent 27 years, he spent 18 years. We were all on the same unit. No one talks about PTSD for us.
That's why I said those specialty courts. See, we have a veterans court, and the whole thing is the same. You know what? And I'm not dissing the benefits, of course, but the whole reason of it is because they think, these folks have unaddressed trauma. We want to address the trauma, and we want to make sure that we're not just yelling them because they have unaddressed trauma. When you lock people in cases, when you take away their rights, when you treat them like animals, what do you think is happening? And then you don't want to give them access to resources like, trauma-informed care. We don't put money into that. And then you're not gonna, you might not have insurance, so these are the problems. So definitely figuring out counseling, how do we address trauma, and PTSD for people who have had those experiences. Hey, y'all. I love it. Okay.
It's gonna help us bring closer, it's focusing on children. Yeah. Because I think we use a lot of resources. With men, with households. The more that we create a financial space for our children and make them more industrious. So one initiative that my wife and I are working on, we have an LLC located in Delaware called Black Love. And so we work on teaching kids financial literacy. So we're working on extend that here in Houston. Really already talking to the board.
Yeah.
So they already know the information, confirmation. And so we really are looking to get people motivated, kids particularly through crypto, financial literacy, NFT coding in particular. That's our main focus. So kids, I see you smiling over here. NFTs. So definitely. And why? Because it's the future, right? And see how you smile, that's because you bought a NFTs the other day. Which means that our children should be too, right?
And creative, right?
And creative. So that's actually focused on our family. So some that all up, I think definitely gets to the point. We really need to double down on our children. Not only double down on our children, we double down on them by us being not afraid to fail in front of them. Right? So that also means that right now there's been a lot of pressure as far as 9-to-5 jobs and who's working and what requirements and payments. And so the best way that we can really make sure our kids are better prepared is by failing all the time, not being unafraid, not because the more that they witness us take that risk, they'll be more empowered, they'll be more confident. And I think that's been, I come from a flight journey, I'm from Nigeria or say Nigeria, right? But my family spent most of the time in Delaware. So that's one big thing I've noticed is it just becomes hard to connect when you get older when you haven't seen all the little steps on how to take the business. So little things like social media, really, they're already in games, right? So the kids are already playing games. So just reminding them that you can get paid for what you're actually already doing is a flip. We got to flip them on because if they're already interested in gaming, then it's just for you to open up that mind box and say, hey, you can be paid for this, right? And pay our bills and pay this all day.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, we'll say less. I want to pay this all day. And they can, and they should. We encourage that. As opposed to sometimes what happens is we were told just to go to college and we just want to do that. So I'll apply after, and so sometimes, paternal bonds, so not everybody understands that college is about networks. Not everybody understands connecting, right? And no matter where you go, you'll have a budget in the room. So for those who don't understand that, and now it's an online experience, we really got to be careful now, right? Because now everything's online. They're not going to get this full networking college experience, so they're still going to take your money all the same though, right? They're still going to, and our real enemy is not a white man, not a black man, it's the interest on all our loans, right? Interest on all our loans, our credit cards, our mortgages, our student loans, because we're deeply in debt, and a lot of our relationships don't last because we're financially set back. So a lot of things always come back to finances, and if we relieve the pressure there, our community will be much better. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. We got one more. So we got investment in counseling, making sure that we acknowledge that PTSD exists For those who are formerly incarcerated, doubling down on making sure our children are financially literate and have access to the future and resources in the last question this year. Or time, okay. Oh, well, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, there are people who are mentally ill in jail. Why are they there? There are people who are homeless. Why are they there? The reason they are there is they bed, kids in the bed is not. But if I'm mental, still have me on trial for something I didn't know I could do. And you're not explaining that to me, so you tase me again, which messes up my mind more. That's 120 folks going through my body, and you don't care because I'm black. I'm still a slave to you, and that's the way they treat people in the criminal justice system. That's why they can move 500 people to Louisiana, because you belong to the state of Texas.
And for those of you, I mean, and you can track this stuff, there's a jail podcast for, it tells you how many people are in jail right now. It also tells you how many people are in jail with a mental illness. And the question is, you know that they have mental illness. Why are you not giving the proper resources? I understand that there's things that will take time, but we need to see that because they shouldn't be there. And that'll also be the population. But thank you all. Like I said, it just starts with you. It starts with us and women.
If you all want more information, please visit their table to get involved. I really appreciate everything that Sasha was talking about. And when you talk about, you send us to prison and then we don't have help when we get out, we were traumatized, you know, we were treated like dogs. I was sweating in my bunk, hoping that I make it out alive. They were less than a gram of dope. You know, I thought I was gonna die in a prison cell. So, and then they send us back with nothing after we've been treated like nothing into a community and expect us to survive and make the community safer. You're not making the community safer. You're sending us to come back worse. And we don't all get life sentences. I really met very few people with life sentences, and that's women. I can't speak for men. But we all come home, and women, we can come back even worse, you know? And we do mental things. So, yes, ma'am.
I have a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Always is like this. We have a lot of useful information. Very useful. The questions that you raised, very useful. But my thing is now, after this 2 hours are over, what are you gonna do?
Yes.
You
Get
take
involved.
this information, and what are you gonna do with it? That, to me, is the most important aspect.
That's right.
Now, here is where my mind says, elections. Elections. Election. Elections. I don't want to embarrass anybody, so maybe you can put your hand behind yourself. But how many of you actually participate in elections on a regular basis? Raise your hand. All right, I'm impressed. For those who do not, the power is in your hand. The power to affect the changes that we are talking about is in your hand. Now, some may have been in the system, and the system says that you're not allowed, okay? I understand that. But that is a part of the problem. When caught up in an electoral system, the criminal justice system, what does that do? That takes your voice away. You do not get a chance to say who's sitting in the chair, making the decisions, because your voice has been stripped away. So point number one, there is a need to focus on, there are some states that allow people who are incarcerated to vote. What is the matter with this state? There is a need to focus on the bigger issues, the policy issue. I'm gonna stop with it. The policy issue, that's number one. We have to, if you cannot vote, you have people in your personal circle, your family, your friends, and your enemies. Tell them to go and vote, even if you have to grab them by the hand and say, come on, it's time for early voting. You see, because you wait until election day, you stand out, you sweat, and so early voting is important. I represent a small organization, and the name spells just what we are all about. Project Voter Turnout. The important thing that we believe is that when you turn out, you're able to hold officials accountable. They must be, those policies don't come out of the air. They come from people who are not sensitive to these issues. Voter turnout. Put simply, you can unseat the wrong seat.
Vote my entire life until the 2020 election. That was my first time I ever voted because I've been incarcerated under the state's thumb for 20 years, either in jail, on probation, or on parole for 20 years. So I got to finally vote in this last presidential election. On probation, on parole, and you're not inside, you can vote.
But that's the leader, that's the thing we want to change.
Exactly.
And then someone could take $30,000 and get two people incarcerated. Give me 20%, 25%, I guarantee I can have that.
Okay.
Okay? I
Charmet.
did it for 30 years. I have proved it. And stop me from going to this years. I have proved it.
Yes,
But
I believe it.
but they are not going to, they realize that community can do more effective.
Mhm.
The core process of
Thank you. We have one, Charmet Findley here to speak for the youth. And, here.
Hi everyone, my name is Charmet. Real quick though, I want to do a little quick wellness check. So like everybody doing okay? If you do not feel good, if you got stuff going on, like not health wise, but mentally, reach out to somebody, see about that, work it out. Mental health is real. I'm here to talk about the youth part, right? And one of the segues that I see is a lot of what you just stated. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you guys a little bit about myself, if that's okay. So my name again is Charmet. I am a product of the system. I grew up in CPS. I aged out of care when I was 18. I'm here, right? I've done the college thing. I've met my parents, done all of that, right? But around the whole time of it all, I've still had to be a citizen. I still had to be a community person, right? A functioning member of society. No one ever taught me that, guys. With that being said, I turned 18 and I did a lot of things that could have hindered me from being successful if I wanted to, or as I wanted. I was homeless, right? And I used to steal food. I used to steal food, in your point as well. I used to steal food from Walmart. Right? I didn't know that there were places that you can go to in the city that would provide you a meal. There were no adults, there were no resource charts, there were no pamphlets, there were no signs or posters. I could see a McDonald's though. You get what I mean? But I didn't know how to survive. I was in survival mode. Doing so added charges to my record. And it's $20 worth of food. Right? Not a criminal, right? What does that make me? But also, I've been in situations where not having a place to stay, Houston gets cold in the winter. Doing so, a friend of mine had issues with his living situation where he was living, his landlord, that kind of thing. He invited me or let me, hey man, if you need somewhere to shower, you need somewhere to, that kind of thing, you can do it here. Upon doing so, the landlord or somebody seen me, even though I unlocked the door, had the key and everything, I was still arrested and taken to jail for trespass. That's also on my record. I was too young. I was 18. I didn't know nothing. Again, I was a victim of the system or product of the system. Never had parents, never had that kind of thing. And lawyers don't always reach out and tell you everything because they got a million things going on, right? So no fault, but I signed for those charges and I took those charges and I can't get those off my record, right? So going to go apply for housing, say I want to get this apartment complex up the street. I can't move in there. Now that my money's up and I'm doing something with myself and I'm standing on my 2 feet, I can't go get a job. Why? Oh, sir, well, you have this on your record, you have this on your record, you have this on your record, right? Getting to your point. Does that make me a criminal? I'm still classified as this man. So my point is going to bring awareness as far as the labels, right? And also, again, to the point of what can be done around that. So the same thing that's happened to me is happening to youth all across the city. Not just all across the city, all across the nation, right? What kind of services can be provided for youth, not even for you, for homeless adults, that kind of thing, right? If you're stealing food, there needs to be somebody there. You don't need to go, when you go to court, right? Or a cop gets called, they shouldn't put you in handcuffs. It should be somebody there, an organization, a partner, a mentor, some kind of service that can come stop you from going to jail. The charge shouldn't be put on the record. You're doing what anybody in the world would do, right? Try and survive, right? No one wants to die, right? We all have, I have my mask off, but we all have our mask on because we want to live, right? So what can we do about that? One of the things I'm trying to do as a youth is I'm trying to put myself in these spaces. As you can see, these are adult-dominated spaces, but more youth are starting to get involved in causes. Houston is definitely picking up, or Texas is definitely picking up on youth advisory boards and youth fellowships and that kind of thing now. There are a lot more programs and stuff like that being established for this reason. But I'm doing that as well as I'm trying to come up with a solution to present to the court. What can we do about this? Can there be mentors? Can the court provide mentors? Can the mayor's office provide mentors with lived experience? Felons, I don't care what they are, don't look at their background. If they're here to say that they've done something and they can prove that they're not doing what they did, they should be able to help out. And that will create change, right? And then the last thing is awareness. It's about us. I don't know where she went. I think she left, but she was just saying, how it's about us. I hear a lot of people say, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? So the same community member that's sitting next to you or your neighbor is also a judge. Your neighbor is also a state representative or can be these things. You get what I'm saying? So these are the same people you went to school with who obviously didn't have no idea that they were going to be running these particular topics, right? Or in charge of these particular things. And now you still, or they have access over the community that they came from. And it also removes them from that community. but they're still a part of the community, right? So we are still a part of that same process. This is my first time being in here, but this right here, this we are, therefore I am, if you read it, there's no me without you. There's no government, there's no community, there's no government, there's no department, agency, that kind of thing without the community, right? And vice versa. So we're part of that. To me, that's the definition of a community. It's up to us to be adults, to be responsible, to hold ourselves accountable, to go push these people. Like the brother was saying from top, it's our purpose to push them. We show up, we have a city, or for you guys that don't know, I'm with the Collective Action for Youth. I'm sorry, I definitely forgot about saying that. But we're, our mission and vision is pretty much to create solutions where all communities for youth can thrive, right? We'll be having a city hall sit-in on February 15th from 12 to 1, if you would like to come. But again, if you would like to, is more so the problem. You gotta show up. You get what I mean? You want things to change, you gotta be there, you gotta be present, you gotta do something about it. We are the people, we are the community. This is about us. And then not to mention, these youth will grow up to be our neighbors.
Yes.
You get what I'm saying? They're gonna be our people.
Did you want to say something? Okay, and then we have Jesse.
Hello, my name is Albert James Yancey, 6105. Being brother alluded to a while ago. I served 27 years, 5 months, and 1 day in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I've been listening to the different organizations presented on this afternoon, and I'm always appalled when I come into an atmosphere as such, and I hear of men and women who are trying to fight the fight for the voices. For those years, I was one of the ones whose voices, my brother that was on the same facility with me was also voices. So first of all, I want to applaud you and thank you for the service that you do in the community. In addressing some of the problems, one of the things that the brother just talked about, he talked about having to steal food, having now being classified as a criminal, can't get an apartment, can't get a job. One of the things that I tell the men and women who I mentor, who I talk to, who are in the prison system and who have come out of the prison system is when you convicted, when you became a convicted felon, you became an involuntary signed up to become an entrepreneur. In other words, when I was in prison, if I wanted to get something from me to Maggie over there, I created a line.
Yeah.
I created a line, I threw it to her, she tied whatever she wanted onto that line, and I was able to bring it to me, and then vice versa. We have to use that same mindset out here. Hey, I can't go get a job, what can I do to create a job? So I've been home, next month will be 3 years I've been home. I'm an entrepreneur, got my own business already. Another thing is that we talk about apartments, we talk about housing. But when I came home, I went into the car dealership, I was selling cars, and then Corona hit. The car sales went down. So rather than panicking, I just shifted. And what I became a project manager over a concrete company. And one of the things that I noticed is in 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, the Heights, you got people going in and building homes. And I had a lady pull over one day and tell me that I can't be building a home in this community because this is a historical district. And I said, first of all, young lady, you need to go down to the corner where they got their pants sagging and shooting dice and selling crack in your neighborhood before you come and address me. This is my job. The same for sale sign that was on this land for the person who bought this property, guess what? We can do the same thing. And so what we have to do is we have to pool our money together. We have to get past the crab and the bucket mentality and everybody being selfish about their money. Let's pool it together. If you take up any nationality outside of the United States, they come over here and within 5 years, they move into a house, 3 or 4 families, and then what happens? One by one, they move out and they got their own land. What's wrong with us coming in? That same for sale sign that was there, that the quote unquote white man came in and bought to take over your neighborhood, it was Sally Mae
We'll go buy Michael Kors, Louis Vuitton, and all these other things, and they don't give a damn about our community. But yet we don't want to come together and buy the property for $60,000, put a house on it, either give it to, rent it to the felons, and or sell it to be able to create an organization. So those type of things, we have to expand our mind. When the lady talked about voting, no, I can't vote. I got a life sentence at the age of 17 years old. But guess what? One of the things that I learned about the animal kingdom is that the alligator has the strongest jaws in the animal kingdom. But it only takes 2 fingers to shut their mouth. It only takes 2 fingers to shut their mouth. I don't allow a felony to shut my mouth. When I came home, I networked with Al Green, I networked with different individuals, and I went out, I put on a shirt and I put up signs. That's my way of participating in voting. I may not can go to the polls and vote, but guess what? I went to Austin to the legislature, and we talked about the clean slate, and we talked about the second look at, and parole reform, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot that you can do right in your community, and then you can carpool to Austin with other people. I slept on the floor in prison. I can sleep on the floor in a hotel room if we all come together. So I applaud y'all for what y'all doing. But the thing is that one of the things that damaged me the most and why I kind of pulled back when I first came home is because I had an organization that asked me to speak for a certain bill. And when it passed the House and went to the Senate, they told me I couldn't talk. They told me they didn't want to hear my story, but yet they used my face and my story for many years while I was incarcerated and when I came home. But then you're gonna tell me that my voice, that I may say the wrong thing? What is the wrong thing? You never spent time in prison. You didn't enter into prison at the age of 17 years old and have to fight for your life and seeing men who are normal one day to eating their feces the next day, cutting on themselves, putting sheets around their neck. The brother talked about posting, she talked about TCJE. I don't label it that. I label it post-incarceration syndrome. That's what it is. And these are the elephants in these type of rooms that's not being spoken about. But we have to bring it out. And it takes men and women who have went through the system to say, hey, I got a strong voice. I'm not gonna let 2 fingers, felony, close my mouth. So continue to do what you do, and we appreciate y'all.
And she is from all the way from Livingston, and she'll tell you about the organization she works
All right, hey guys. My name is Jessie from Pasadena, and after listening to everybody today, let me just say I'm qualified. I was kidnapped by a man and a woman when I was 13 years old, and they kept me for 2 weeks and about killed me. They shot me up with drugs and used and abused me and left me for dead. At the age of 14, I was a full-blown junkie, and I lived on the streets and I ran. And I was in and out of, I was in and out of county jails. I was in and out of my family's lives and all these things. I was the big tornado, as the big book of Alcoholic calls it. Alcoholics Anonymous, running through my family's lives. At the time, I lost my mom and my dad and my husband all within a year and a half. And I went off the deep end. And in 2000, my boyfriend finally died, and he was the last one to die in 2008. 2009 to 2017, I was in Plain State Jail every year for at least 6 to 9 months every year. So that means I was only out, 3 or 4 months, maybe five a year for those years. When I was in there, I would walk through the water about this deep in the chow halls. And, it was bad. I got lice in my hair. Never had a bug in my hair before in my life. I'm like, I need help. These guards and stuff, they wouldn't let me have it. The girls in the dorms were taking mayonnaise and putting on my hair, trying to get these bugs and stuff out of my hair. That was the last time I went. And I kept saying, I'm doing something about this. Somebody needs to do something about this. We all need to do something about this, but yet when I get out, I forget about this left behind. And I keep moving. In 2017 was the last time I went back to state jail. And I'm like, man, I gotta quit doing this. You know, I kept getting out and doing the same thing over and over and over and over. And that was satisfying me, what I wanted to do. I had an addiction that was out of this world, and what Walmart's was mine, what's yours was mine, and whatever was mine, I took to support this habit that I had. In 2017, I had a friend, and she's not here, but she is getting better. Her name is Kirsten Ricketts, and she's an advocate, and she knows these people, and asked me to speak today. I had never had been sober more than maybe 6 to 8 months at one time, but I still was stealing and gambling and living on the streets. And I called my friend. I was in drug court. I've been through all the courts. They knew me. They kept telling me, you come back, we're sending you away. The last time I went before the judge in drug court, she said, I'm sending you 2 to 10. And God saw something different, which I didn't see then. And he locked me away in state jail for 100 days. And I said, where do I sign? I can do that on my head, you know, yeah, no problem. And so when I got out of there, I did okay, but I was still doing what I did, you know, and I didn't know how to do anything different. I had a criminal record. I couldn't go do anything. I didn't have this, I didn't have that, all these things that were stigma on me. And I said, you know, I need to do something different. So I called my friend and I went to Restore City Streets. This is her organization. She founded and created in 2015. And it's a women's discipleship program. And I said, man, you need to come get me. I ended up in this roach infested house with this person. I ain't going in there. You know, I'm done. And so she came and picked me up. And that's the last time I've been locked up. That's the last time I've taken a drink. And it's the last time I've gotten high. And that was August 7th, 2017. So I said, what do I do? How do I not get high? She said, you got to know Jesus and you have to have a relationship with him. And I'm like, you know, I am him. That's what I thought. You know, I was my own God for so many years. I didn't answer to nobody. I didn't submit to authority. I didn't do any of that stuff. I did what I wanted, when I wanted, and how I wanted. And so I started walking with Christ, and Kirsten took me under her wing, and she is my mentor and my best friend. And anyway, so I'm like, well, you know, I got a year and I was ready. I was out of there, right? And God said, no, you're not. And I had an income tax check coming, right? So I'm leaving. And he took my income tax and paid on this school loan I had from, I don't know when I went to school, but I did. And took out a loan, but it was probably to pay somebody back. Really want to know the truth. So anyway, the next month after he took my income tax check, DARS program called me and said, we're going to pay for you to go get your GED. And I'm like, well, I'm 53 years old. I'm like, I don't need a GED. And God said, yeah, you do. And so I went and got my GED. Well, needless to say, I'm a junior at the College of Biblical Studies today, and I'm fixing to graduate with an organizational leadership degree. God knew better than me. But Kirsten kept encouraging me to go back about the ones that I had left behind that I always said I was going to fight for, and I never did, you know, because I'm selfish. And so I went to legislature, and I'm like, what do I do? And they go, you go in there and you tell them, well, I had been traumatized. I had been in mental health. I've been diagnosed bipolar, PTSD, you name it, PISD, all of it. I had it. And the people would put me on the medicines, you know, and I didn't know that's going to fix me, but it didn't. He's the only one that fixed me. But I got to be able to go back in and say, hey, look, you know, this is what he did for me. And I had to forgive those people who took me and almost killed me. And so that was a big thing. You know, I was mad at the system. The man got 2 years in prison and she got 6 months probation. I was mad. It wasn't fair. And here I go in and I come out and I can't even go rent an apartment, right? Because all this stuff, right? So I go to legislature and I get to see how this process works, right? And so then I get my voter's card, right? So I get to vote, right? So we do have something to say. We all have something to say, you know? Now God has told me to stay. I've been at Restore City Streets under Kirsten's discipleship program for the last 4.5 years. God's given us this food trailer out here, right, to pour back into the community. And it's to go out and to make things aware that, you know, our voices matter. Our voices count. So now we are TCJE approved housing, right? So people can parole out to us and let us show you how to walk this thing out, man, with him, and you can do whatever, right? I got a brand new Texas driver's license number now. Now, y'all, let me tell y'all something. I ain't had a driver's license 15 years. I had lots of driving on suspended license. Went down there to go to my driver's license. They these people gonna give me a new number. I'm like, well, this don't happen, but he makes things happen. And he made things happen so I can take these ladies back and forth to parole. Okay, but now what I'm finding out now is this lady just paroles out to us 27 years, man. 27 years, ain't got an ID. Ain't got an ID. Okay, awesome. We need to. So we're running into these problems. We got another one coming out. She can't get back and forth to do anything because she's done 27 years. Now she's on GPS. Can't go out of the house. She's still locked down. She's still locked down, man. And it's like, you know, you've done your time, but these are things that we need to go and speak on. And I just want to encourage everybody, if you're sitting in this room, you've been impacted somehow, you know, and we can be the change. And that's really all I have to say.
And yeah, the food truck is all the way from Livingston. They support the women that are living there. So yeah, so we sure on the way out. Now, this means so much to me because we're changing the narrative of how they talk about it. When I first started going into the Capitol, I walk in with my tattoos. I've got 16 felonies, and I'm talking to the chairman of the corrections committee. Who's got our mustache. And the first time he looked at me, you could tell he was like, and then as time went on, I go in there, he's like, hey, Maggie, what's up? So he knows now I'm a felon. I mean, I have a felon. I have a felony. And I've been to prison, but I'm not that scary monster that you think that I am. And we are your neighbors. We are your cousins. We're working out here in the community. So what do you want to create to come back into this community? We need to change this narrative and the language. I think felons and criminals, I like to say I am formerly incarcerated. I was a resident at the TCJE facility. I was a former resident, or somebody's writing me or something, they are a resident in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I like resident. I mean, I don't like the label, you know, and we're changing the narrative. So when somebody sees me come in to apply for a job, they've already met people like me before. So they're not so scared when they see that I have felonies on my record. You know, let me explain. It's because I was brown and the white girl got to go home, you know. So that's not all of them. I do a whole bunch of other stuff. But anyway, so I appreciate everybody coming out today. If, like they said earlier, stay involved, stay involved. Don't just stop today. Get some of our information. We have meetings virtually once a month on Tuesdays, the first Tuesday of every month. We meet and we talk about what we're going to do when session comes. So I hope that y'all can join us and learn to tell your story in front of these people who make these laws for us. And you don't need any degree, anything else. All you need to know is something that they can never go to school for. They will never be able to learn what you've been through, because the degree you got is street credit, and they don't have that. And so it's Tuesday night at 6 p.m. So if you grab one of our flyers back there, you can sign up, and I send out a link every Tuesday. Every first Tuesday. So stay involved. We help. And like I said, I didn't know this system. I got out of prison with nothing but my shoes that were cracked, and you know, I was dehumanized. I felt like a feral animal. And so I've gone from that to where I am today, because I just didn't give up. People made me feel like I was. You can't give up, no matter how hard it may seem. Those people have degrees, but we know what we're talking about. Yes, speak red. Yes.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. You know how blessed and honored I am to be able to have this here. They call this the United Nations of the Hood. I mean, everybody from Winnie Mandela to Dick Gregory to Reuben Hurricane Carter to all the people that have just been incarcerated. Hurricane Carter did 20-some years. He had to get out of America and get to Canada. He got his MSW and he died in Canada because he was running away from this monster here. So I'm saying Shea Turner is more than an honor. I mean, we're just excited and thankful for you allowing us to have, for us, asking us. Like you didn't even have to ask us. Yeah, I'm just doing anytime you want to have an event. And I say that publicly, YouTube, C2, YouTube, y'all hear this? Anytime you want to have an event and shape like this, you're welcome. And I don't worry about no money or whatever. This is the things to get done. We're not supposed to do everything. You're supposed to do something. Somebody else supposed to. But if you don't have a place, a space to do it in, we can serve as a conduit for it to take place in. So just like what you're doing out here, something is going on in the park right now. Another progressive movement. And then they're eating in the kitchen, in the restaurant. Then they have NA and they're meeting in a room in the library. So a lot is going on at Shape. And I want to let you know, I've been running this center now 52 years. June 1st, 1969. And we're still here. And you know why we're here? Because of you. You keep the movement alive. And the movement is really alive. So anything you want, hey, walk around, turn up, do something, out, cartwheel, backflip, the restroom is over there, the park is right here. Just make yourself at home. You can then go around and just enjoy yourself, okay? And again, my name is Deloyd, D-E-L-O-Y-D, Deloyd Parker. And my mother didn't put the M-R on the front of it. She just named me Deloyd. M-R is the real name of master. They put one name on master. You got me? So just Brother Deloyd. Thank you very much, okay?
A reminder about the table, and hey, I made a t-shirt for my side hustle, because I'm an entrepreneur. I had to learn how to get it. So I have some back there, my daughter is handling that, so if you want to talk to her, we have some, they're $10 each. And Ray just froze. Savannah wants to say something.
I just want to remind everybody to please visit the tables of the organizations that are present to make sure you get their information and support the work that they're doing out in the community. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to be doing this in more counties. Coming to a county near you, I'm not sure where yet, but thank you all so much for coming to share.